Hey gang, today I wanted to take you through my process for a heavy metal minimalist style Raven Guard. I'll make more for other legions, chapters, and factions, and cover theory like lighting and composition all here on this channel. Step 1. Base coats. For the black areas, I'm using the Darkness from Army Painter. If you prefer Warhammer brand paint, then Stegadon Scale Green with a dab of black is the most similar. We just want a very dark blue or turquoise. While doing this tutorial, I did arrive at a crossroad. With the darkness and null oil over the top of it, it looks like that bluish green-black sheen that IRL ravens have, and I was tempted to do the top coat this color as well to keep that. It's only just not black, so it's quite subtle, but it was voted on by Crack and Sam to keep the black instead. But if you think it looks nicer with the teal sheen, then maybe swap out the matte black top coat for more of the darkness. The aim of this base layer is to use a paint that will color the null oil wash we'll do over the top. This is so I don't have to use multiple different colored shades over different colored parts, and instead I can just use the null oil all over and have a color underneath to tint it as needed. This layer doesn't need to be perfect, but try and make the coverage uniform. This will help in step 3, as patchy base coats may show through the top coat later. If you wanted to be pedantic, then you can do the null oil in just the places you want it to stay. But I find just a full dunk helps with in-depth coverage for deeper shadows and speed. For the red pauldron, I'm using Blanched Berry from Army Painter, or Barrack Nar Burgundy from Warhammer. This will get us that nice crimson-y scarlet that we want. Basically just look for a nice, smooth, deep burgundy. For most Adeptus Astartes, the pauldron trim color is based on the company the boy is in. When I do these tutorials, I generally pick one that I think people most associate with that chapter that isn't just the same color as the main armor, in this case crimson, but you can do virtually any color for these. Try and keep these colors neat on the trim and on panels, as getting them on each other will show through the null oil and might be a bit odd looking with the shadows later. The aim with this layer is to create the value distance with color and tone, so armor panels and segments like trim are all separated out, so when they're on tabletop you can still see the definition and details of the mini at the distance. You don't need to be too pedantic about fixing mistakes, however, as these are for tabletop gaming, and you won't be 5 centimeters away from the minis like you are when painting. Step 2. Null oil. This bit does not need to be careful. Just slop it on, puddle it in the edges and recesses for darker shadows, and try and do entire panels in as few strokes as you can, otherwise you may get tide lines as it dries. Make sure to properly shake your null oil for a minute, as I've had a couple times I didn't and it's dried glossy because I didn't mix in the pigment enough with the medium. While this dries, make a cup of tea and think about how your Primarch is a sick-ass flock of ravens in the warp harassing his brother, as opposed to his other brother who only had one pair of wings that were white and so would frequently be stained by baked beans. Like this video, subscribe, and potentially become a channel member to get exclusive channels in my Discord where I post photos of my kitten and take requests for tutorials to make. I also stream painting on here and Twitch if you want to hang out and ask questions, or watch me be bad at Space Marine 2 or other games. Step 3. Top coats. For the black, I'm using Matte Black by the Army Painter. Warhammer brand Abaddon Black is the alternative. Like I mentioned before, I did quite like how he looked with just the base coat and null. If you like it like that, maybe paint up 2 boys and finish one with more of that base color and then one with this black top coat and see what you prefer. I thought it looked more like shiny raven feathers with the teal, and it's only just not black, so it looks quite subtle from a distance on tabletop. Like with every other time I've covered black as a top coat, we're watering it down to a kind of medium opacity. Test this by adding water until it gets difficult to manage and makes puddles. Remember what that is like, and then let it dry a little in the palette to thicken up again, and then do it again, but stopping before you get to that puddly mess wateriness. So now your black should be thick enough to not be annoying to use or make puddles on the mini, and thin enough to move around easily and leave a thin glaze on the mini. Go layer by layer and let each dry in between so you can check after each with your black value. Let it dry for a minute and then check under a light source to see if you can still see the teal base where the light reflects and that the rest is black looking. Do as many layers as you need or want to get this effect. effect. This will leave you with a nice subtle sheen of colour matching that of the raven bird wings in the sun. On parts that are up against the wall of another panel, I leave about 1 millimeter or 0.5 millimeter gap between my top coat and the crease so that I can have an outline to separate the panels a bit and save me from accidentally going up those walls that should be left dark. With this dark base and the black on top, this won't be super obvious, like the white scar outlines, but it's worth doing anyway for that subtle sheen. If you leave these thin layers kind of patchy and uneven, it can look more battle-worn, and you can use those brushstroke lines and patchinesses to help plan out any weathering or battle damage you want to add, but I'm unsure if this will look odd due to the glaze we're doing. I also don't really do battle damage, I just prefer armor looking super new and clean. Be most careful in the recessed armor, such as on this arm, under his elbow and wrist plate, to not get the top coat on the perpendicular sides of these extruded surfaces. But back to the pauldrons. I'm using Army Painter's Basilisk Red. Warhammer Wordbearer's Red seems similar enough. I'm essentially aiming for a darker red rather than a bright red here, as a brighter red will distract too much from the black. I did the lenses on the helmet the same reds I used for this trim if you want him to have red eyes as well. Using the side of your brush on the trim is the most efficient way of painting it. You should be able to cover that top plane in one go more or less without it going down the sides. If you want to have some extra depth, you can leave any down or backwards facing surfaces with no top coat, and to use the top coat color as highlights as per step 4 on those faces instead. This could either do nothing or be subtly cool AF. Make sure you're happy with this layer before moving on. Step 4. Highlights. On the black, I made a 50-50 mix of the Darkness and Kraken Lavender, both from Army Painter. From Warhammer paints, I'd assume doing the same with Stegadon Scale Green and D'Chala Lilac will give a similar result, though I'm not sure on the ratio. This mix is a nice soft teal, with more saturation than if I had just mixed white into the dark teal. So here I'm essentially outlining all of my top coat panels with outside edges, or like on this elbow panel, a sculpted edge in the middle. Because we're doing these over the top coat, if you make a mess, we can go back over this later with more top coat color. Just be aware if you do this, it may solidify the black in patches you fix and look a little messy. If you want more depth, only do these edge lines on front and top facing edges, but I'd only recommend this if you also did this with the top coat as well, like I mentioned previously. Otherwise, go all over and edge up all the cliffs and sculpted edges. I tend to water down my paint a bit for this just so I can use a smaller brush so the paint doesn't dry before I put it on the Mini. If you find the edges looking too pale, mix in some more of the darker color you used until you find a shade you're happy with. Adding more dark teal will lead to more subtle edges, which can be nice. On the other hand, if you find your lines are too subtle and dark, add more of the paler color until you find a nice balance in contrast and value to the black armor. This slight purple teal should finalize the shiny black feather effect. Feel free to add more pale color after you've done the lines for dot highlights on the corners. When doing a black scheme like this, there are two options for the gun. Either do it the same process as the armor so the blacks match, or do your regular black with blue-grey highlights. Both are nice. Having it the same will look quite smart, but having them different will make the gun look more distinguished from the boy. This is probably the bit that took the longest, as I wanted to be careful not to redo highlights, and to get the thinness of edge lines that I wanted. I use my little tiny brush for this, so I add as much water to the paint as I need for it not to dry on the small brush. If you're doing an entire army in this style, I probably wouldn't recommend sub-assembling like this, but it can help. If you're going into an army fully built and glued, only do step 3 onwards on bits that you can reach. This will by accident make a nice shadow area behind guns and under arms that will make him look a little more dramatic. With sub-assembly, you can get every surface to look flat and uniform with lighting, so ending with a more cartoony or classic heavy metal result. The only difference this will have to actual heavy metal styling is not doing the highlight lines on the plate surface of the shoulders and knees. This is just personal preference, I don't like how it looks, so I don't do it. On the trim, I'm treating this more like metallics, so I tend to pick outer edges or corners to highlight, and then a secondary bright spot if I feel like it needs it. I'm now using that bright pure red from Army Painter or Wazdacker red from Warhammer. Try and feather out these highlight spots to avoid harsh tide lines. This red shouldn't be so pale as to make the red look washed out and dull, and if you use a more white red like Barbarian Flesh, then you'd be at risk of making the trim look dusty. The red should be saturated enough to highlight the trim, but not take away from the rest of the mini. The rest of the owl. From this video, learn the things and put it to use on the rest of the mini. This style is good for quick, consistent minis that look good with only a handful of paints. In total, this arm took me about 15 to 20 minutes, not including the Nuln Oil drying tea break. When I painted the rest of the mini afterwards, it took about the same time as a single arm, maybe a little longer, as it's a very simple process that's meant to be fast to do. This is my fully finished Raven Guard Infernus Marine in this style, with all his markings free-handed on. You can use transfers, I'm just lazy, and I don't have a sheet for him to use. If you do use transfers, remember to use a matte varnish over the top to get rid of that shininess. Here is a list of all the things I used in this video. And I'll make more videos for lenses, various guns, and freehanding hacks, so don't panic if yours doesn't look like mine. I don't tend to use transfers, but I can cover those in a video as well if needed. As always, thanks for watching. Check out my other hobby content or my dumbass gaming content on the main channel. Like, sub, leave a comment how you got on, Discord is in the description, and see ya.